Welcome to Forgotten Faces. Today's story is unsettling, brutal, and essential to remember, not because of admiration, but because history must serve as a warning. We're diving into the life of Josef Mengele, known to history as the Angel of Death, a man whose horrific legacy spans not just the atrocities at Auschwitz, but also a life lived as a fugitive in South America, evading justice until his death. Josef Mengele was born in 1911 in Günzburg, Germany, into what you might call a respectably wealthy, conservative Catholic family. His dad ran a successful agricultural equipment business, so young Josef grew up with all the comforts of middle-class German life. Plenty of books, maybe a bike, and presumably enough room to dream big, in a very, very twisted way. From an early age, Mengele showed he had brains to spare. Not content with ordinary schooling, he soaked up knowledge like a sponge, eventually earning a PhD in anthropology and a medical degree, because why settle for one doctorate when you can double down on human science? He wasn't some back-alley quack or a shadowy figure lurking in a lab coat. This guy had legit academic credentials from the University of Munich and the Institute for Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene. Fancy titles, impressive degrees, and, as history painfully reminds us, a moral compass stuck somewhere in the recycling bin. In the 1930s, Germany was going through a weird mix of economic panic, political chaos, and total obsession with racial science. Suddenly, pseudoscience like eugenics wasn't just tolerated, it was trendy in the halls of academia. Mengele, ever the ambitious scholar, dove headfirst into this world, becoming obsessed with so-called racial purity, a hobby with horrifying real-world applications. By 1937, he officially joined the Nazi Party, because why stop at being a smart guy when you can be a smart guy with power? And just a year later, he enlisted in the Waffen-SS, the Nazi Army's elite club. Historian Robert J. Lifton, in The Nazi Doctors, calls Mengele the ultimate example of the scientific soldier, someone who fused highbrow medicine, anthropological curiosity, and total moral bankruptcy. Fair warning, what follows is extremely disturbing, and definitely not the kind of story for casual listening. If you'd rather skip the horrors, jump ahead to the next chapter in the time codes. In 1943, Mengele landed at Auschwitz, the place that would etch his name into history for all the wrong reasons. This is where the nightmare truly begins. Picture him on the infamous train ramps, clipboard in hand, casually deciding who lived and who died with nothing more than a flick of his hand or a glance. People with disabilities, pregnant women, no one escaped his attention if they fit the profile for his so-called research. His obsession? Twins. Mengele believed that by studying them, he could unlock the secrets of genetic manipulation and racial perfection. A horrifying hobby dressed up as science. Survivor Eva Moses Kor recalled his approach as a chilling mix of charm and cruelty. Polite on the surface, monstrous underneath. Twins were starved, injected with mysterious chemicals, mutilated surgically, often without anesthesia, all in the name of his twisted scientific ambition. And it didn't stop at twins. Mengele experimented with eye color, injecting children's eyes with chemicals to see what would happen. He infected people with diseases, amputated limbs unnecessarily, and even dissected bodies while they were still alive. As historian Robert J. Lifton notes, Mengele treated humans like lab materials, reducing living people to mere data points for a warped ideological agenda. It's almost surreal, a man in a crisp uniform surrounded by numbers and charts, while lives were being destroyed one by one. Mengele's reign of terror at Auschwitz lasted about 20 months, from May 1943 to January 1945. In that time, he oversaw the selection and experimentation of thousands of prisoners, with historians estimating up to 3,000 children, mostly twins, passed through his experiments, most of them never surviving. And then came 1945. The Soviet Red Army was closing in, the camp was being evacuated, and Mengele disappeared into the chaos of a collapsing Reich, vanishing like a ghost while the world struggled to comprehend the horrors he left behind. From ramp to escape, his story is a chilling reminder of how intellect, unchecked by morality, can become the most dangerous weapon of all. When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, Mengele was not captured despite Allied forces overrunning Germany. He was briefly held in U.S. custody under a false name, but was released because his SS blood-type tattoo had been removed. By 1949, with the help of a Nazi escape network known as the Ratlines, facilitated by sympathetic clergy and corrupt officials, Mengele obtained Red Cross documents and fled to Argentina. Historian Gerald Steinecker, in Nazis on the Run, details how these Ratlines funneled countless war criminals to safety, exploiting Cold War politics. Mengele's flight was not exceptional. It was disturbingly systematic. Countless others followed the same path. Adolf Eichmann, one of the masterminds behind the Holocaust, slipped into Argentina. Klaus Barbie, the infamous butcher of Lyon, found refuge in Bolivia, and Dr. Herbert Heim, another sadistic camp doctor, disappeared for decades, with credible reports placing him in Egypt. Mengele was just one shadow in a much larger post-war vanishing act. So Josef Mengele landed in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where he lived relatively openly for a time. Thanks to a network of Nazi sympathizers and the financial backing of his family's prosperous German business, he could slip into civilian life with disturbing ease. He even went by his real name until 1959, blending into the local German expatriate community while quietly reinventing himself. Mengele worked as a farmhand, offered his expertise as a business consultant, and occasionally practiced medicine on the side, under the radar, of course, because who wouldn't want a retired SS doctor giving checkups in their neighborhood? Everything changed in 1960, when Mossad captured Adolf Eichmann in a dramatic operation that made headlines around the world. The event sent shockwaves through the hidden Nazi networks and, understandably, gave Mengele pause for thought. Fearing the same fate, he fled to Paraguay, obtaining citizenship with the help of pro-Nazi officials, who apparently were surprisingly easy to find back then. But even Paraguay wasn't safe enough, so he moved again, this time to Brazil, hopping between rural farms and hiding in plain sight while maintaining a life of quiet paranoia. And yes, paranoia is probably the least the world owed him. Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal doggedly pursued him, but internal Mossad documents later revealed that after Eichmann's trial, Mengele became less of a priority, which, in hindsight, was a bureaucratic gift he exploited fully. For years, he slipped through the cracks, aided by sympathetic German expatriates and far-right supporters, moving whenever the walls seemed to close in. Historian Guy Walters, in Hunting Evil, notes that Mengele was cited multiple times, sometimes barely escaping capture, a testament to both his cunning and the political and logistical failures that allowed one of history's most notorious figures to remain free for decades. By 1979, Josef Mengele's decades-long flight from justice came to an unceremonious end. He drowned while swimming near São Paulo, Brazil, after suffering a stroke. Unlike the dramatic courtroom finales that many imagined for the Angel of Death, Mengele's exit was quiet, almost absurdly mundane. For years, the world didn't even know he was gone. It wasn't until 1985, when forensic teams exhumed his remains and confirmed his identity using DNA testing, that history could finally close the book on his life. Imagine a man responsible for some of humanity's most horrific experiments, slipping through decades of manhunts, only to die like any ordinary beachgoer, peaceful, unpunished, and frustratingly unremarkable. So why wasn't Mengele caught? The answer is a cocktail of bureaucratic incompetence, Cold War distractions, and, let's be honest, the occasional lack of will among authorities who could have acted sooner. Nazi hunters chased leads for years. Sightings came and went, but political priorities shifted. Resources were limited, and the world had moved on, or so it seemed. Historian Deborah Lipstadt points out that Mengele's long escape became a stark symbol of post-war justice's failures, a reminder that intellect, cunning, and a network of sympathizers could disturbingly outmaneuver even the most determined pursuit. In the end, Mengele's death didn't bring closure so much as a bitter irony. A man who had caused unimaginable suffering escaped the justice he so thoroughly avoided, leaving the world to reckon not only with his crimes, but also with the uncomfortable gaps in accountability that allowed him to vanish for decades. Some faces in history must be remembered, not to glorify, but to confront the darkest depths of human capability. Josef Mengele's story is not just about a man, but about the system that created him and the failures that allowed him to flee. By understanding this, we safeguard history's truth. This was Forgotten Faces. Next time, we promise something a little lighter, but no less impactful. Subscribe and join us in reclaiming history, one story at a time.